I grew up on a large estate surrounded by nature. It was very isolating, and I had no neighbours until I moved out. The house itself was big and old, prompting many comments from friends comparing it to a horror movie house. When I turned 17, I moved out to go to university, which didn't please my grandparents, who were the other house residents, so I avoided coming back. Ever since I moved out, I started having vivid dreams of walking alone at night, something I had never done. I roamed the streets around the house, always alone and always searching for someone. I was annoyed by the frequency of these dreams, as they came multiple times a week. Around that time, I also started having other odd dreams that resulted in strange coincidences. I dreamt of places I hadn't been in years, and the next day, I got invited to go there. I dreamt of random objects and then received them as gifts. The same thing happened with people. Still, those dreams came and went, but the dream of walking alone persisted. I once went back to the estate for a party a few years later and decided to take a ride back downtown to go back home. I hopped in a car with some relatives, and another car was following us. It was dark and the second car got lost. I called the people in the other car and guided them back to the main road. We waited for them in front of an old slaughterhouse, and I mentioned how I dreamt about walking down those roads almost every night, even though I had never done so. The people in the car all believed in spiritualism, and one of them said that I should pay more attention to those dreams. I shrugged it off and let it go. When I turned 20, I decided to move back with my grandparents and return to living in that house. The dreams became more frequent. A few months after moving back, my grandparents had to leave town for a few days, but I couldn't go with them as I had to shoot some things for university. They left on a Friday afternoon, and I invited a friend to sleep over with me. She had to take a train and then call an Uber to get to my house, something she had done multiple times. She ended up being late and arrived in my town almost at midnight. It should have taken about half an hour for her to get from the train station to my house, but as time passed, she didn't arrive. I was getting desperate when she called me at 1:01 to tell me that the driver refused to drive around those roads at night and had dropped her off on a road. She sent me a picture that looked like the end of my street, so I told her to just walk and I would find her. It was a short walk that should have lasted around 2 minutes, but she never came. She called me again, saying that she was lost, and sent me a picture of a house. I told her to stay there and I would go looking for her. I walked around those streets alone, in a white nightgown and pin curls in my hair. I roamed those streets for what felt like hours. I considered getting the car keys and searching for her, but I didn't know how to drive. There are a lot of cliffs around here, and I went around all of them trying to find the house that she had sent me a picture of. I had recorded some videos and sent them to another friend, asking for advice. She told me to call an Uber to pick her up, so I did that. I kept trying to find the house just by its number, just in case. The Uber arrived, and after I calmed down, I started questioning my friend about the identity of the woman who had led her into the house. She described her to me, and I decided to look for her to thank her. I called another one of my friends, who was supposed to join us the following day, to tell her the story. Her boyfriend answered and said she was in the hospital because she had poured boiling water on her hands and needed medical attention. I noticed she had called me the same time the accident happened, which coincidentally was at 1:01. The same time my lost friend had called me to tell me that she was lost. After that night, the dreams of walking in the woods stopped. I had driven by the area multiple times searching for the house and never found it. I live in fear that I will have to walk there by myself again and that something worse will happen. I, F23, just randomly remembered this incident from my childhood. I've told a few people about it, including my mum and my boyfriend, but mostly keep it to myself since it doesn't really come up in my mind that much. However, after watching some paranormal/demonic videos on YouTube, I felt compelled to share. When I was around 5 or 6, my dad bought his first house after we had lived in an apartment for most of my young life. When we moved in, things were mostly normal. The house would creak, but my dad chalked it up to settling noises as it was newly built with no prior history. I used to be fairly scared of paranormal and demonic occurrences, having experienced a few in my young life. I also had anxiety from a very young age, so any strange noise in the house would frighten me, often leading me to seek comfort in my dad's bed to fall back asleep. My dad obliged until my stepmom moved in and felt it was time for me to learn to self-soothe and stop coming into their bed whenever I got scared, which was around the age of 8 or 9. Now, one very specific night, something extremely frightening happened, and the strangest part is, I don't even remember it. My parents still swear to this day that it happened, and they're as puzzled as I am that I have no recollection of it. What I do remember is waking up one night lying on my stomach, although I have no idea what time it was. I distinctly remember hearing 2 growling noises coming from under my bed. It wasn't like a dog's growl or a human mimicking one. It was primal, deep, and menacing. To clarify, we had no pets at that time, so it couldn't have been a dog. Strangely, in my half-asleep state, I fell back asleep almost immediately after hearing the growling. I just remember hearing the growls and then blacking out. It's odd to think about because I know that if I had been fully awake, I would have at least sat up and screamed. I was easily frightened as a child and still am as an adult. The next thing I remember is waking up in my parents' bed, sitting up and not remembering how I got there. Immediately, both of them sat up with me, as if they had been lightly sleeping, and asked if I was okay. Confused and tired, I told them I was fine. I apologized for finding my way into their bed, and started to get up to return to my own bedroom. However, my dad stopped me and had me turn around so he could look at the back of my leg, near my calf and hamstring. I had woken up screaming and nearly broke down their door, banging on it and begging to be let inside. They lock their door at night. As parents, they immediately knew something was wrong and opened the door without hesitation. My dad told me that I had clung to him, still screaming and crying that there was a demon under my bed and that it had scratched me. He turned on the lights and, sure enough, both of them recall seeing a distinct set of scratches on my leg. They were spaced like human fingers, not like a cat scratch or a scrape from something. They were intentional, red and raised. My dad said he immediately searched and found nothing under the bed with a flashlight, checked my closet, and even walked around outside. Everything was locked, including the house and windows. They let me sleep in their bed because I was understandably inconsolable, and they didn't want me to sleep alone at that point anyway. When my dad checked my leg again, the scratches were gone. There was nothing there to prove that anything had happened. To this day, it shocks me that I don't remember a single moment except for the growling. It's as if the memory has been deleted from my mind. Could it have been traumatic enough that I blocked it out immediately? Like, the very next day, being confused about the situation as if it had never happened. Some might just say I was just an anxious child with nightmares. But with both of my parents insisting that it happened, I can't just simply downplay it and act like nothing happened. It remains a truly unexplainable event in my life. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. My family home is haunted by its previous owners. I don't remember who discovered this, but long before my family owned a house, A couple lived there. They couldn't have children despite their efforts, so it was just the husband and his wife. One day, the husband fell ill and passed away in the basement, which served as the main living area containing their bedroom and bathroom. Shortly after his death, it is said that the wife died from a broken heart, or something similar. Now, my family owns the house, and we believe the wife wore either a grieving gown until her death, or possibly a wedding dress, but it's hard to discern. We often see her as a dark shadow at the end of the hallway, or in our peripheral vision, so we've never been certain. The husband's presence seems confined to the basement. One specific incident I recall vividly. I was setting up a hammock in the basement, next to a bin full of old toys from when everyone, including my mother, aunt, and uncle, were young. Among them was a dog-like toy with buttons on its paws and ears. I'll attach a photo if permitted. Unexpectedly, it activated on its own, saying,
"That tickles. Do it again."
I wasn't anywhere near it, so I panicked and ran to my uncle. When we returned to inspect the toy, he picked it up to check the battery pack, only to find it completely empty. There was no way it could have functioned with no batteries inside. While he was examining it, the toy started suddenly singing in his hand. We were terrified and ran towards the stairs. Glancing beside me, I saw a life-sized Barbie doll that my mum received when she was around 8 years old. She's 36 now. To my horror, the doll began moving on its own, its arms and legs lifting as if reaching out to us, rocking back and forth. This intensified my fear, and we ran faster. Needless to say, neither my uncle nor I have set foot in that basement since. I think it might have been the old man playing tricks on us, but I'm not entirely certain. From what I've heard, both he and his wife loved children, so I doubt that they would intentionally frighten us like that. I apologize if this story isn't entirely coherent. I'm recounting it as I remember, and I didn't pay much attention in class when it came to writing or storytelling. I've worked at Walmart for 3 years, and I've seen my fair share of weirdos. It's just something that comes with the territory. One particular person I met who worked there, however, is the closest I've knowingly come to true evil. This story isn't going to be like something out of a horror movie, but rather an example of how the scariest things can be the real-life monsters that lurk around us every day. I've changed the names in this story for the purpose of anonymity. To give some context, I'm a 24-year-old girl, and I've received unwanted attention from several older men over my years at Walmart. It's uncomfortable, sure, but usually I'm able to brush them off and avoid them. This all changed for me that day that Andrew started working there. Andrew was in his mid-30s. The first time he spoke to me, I immediately sensed something was off with him. He seemed very overly friendly and flirty, the way a guy speaks to a girl when he clearly has an ulterior motive. I tried to make it seem like I wasn't interested with my body language. He made sure to ask me for my name, which I kind of had to give him since it's right there on my name tag. After our interaction, I thought to myself, I'll just try to avoid him from now on. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't avoid him. We didn't work in the same department, but I would encounter him often while walking through the back room and the sales floor. I could feel his eyes on me every time I walked past him. I just had this intense gut feeling to stay away from him. One day, I had to go down the aisle that Andrew was stocking items in. This was a very narrow aisle, and I really didn't want to be in there alone with him. When he saw me, he immediately started up a conversation. He asked me when my birthday was, and wanted to know how old I was turning. I told him that I will be turning 25, and he seemed in disbelief. I've always been told I look younger than I am. I also have braces, which doesn't help in that regard. His shock about my age set off a major red flag. Did he want me to be younger or something? Another time, the two of us alone in an aisle, Andrew asked me if I lived alone. Again, immediate red flag. I told him that I didn't and that I have a roommate. He then prodded for more information. When I told him I lived with a male friend, he asked if I was dating him. I told him that no, I'm not dating my roommate. He said that his heart sunk at first when I told him that I lived with a man. I wanted to roll my eyes. While talking to other female co-workers, I learned that they also got creepy vibes from Andrew. He treated many of the young women that worked in the store this way. One night, I was on Facebook, and I came across his profile in the People You May Know section. Being curious, I clicked on his page. In one of his recent posts, he said that he had been in jail at one point in his life. This piqued my interest, so I googled his name. I felt my stomach drop as I read the headline that popped up. Man charged with self-killing 12-year-old girl. Upon clicking the article, I saw his mugshot. It was him. The neck tattoos matched and everything, except for one thing. Andrew wasn't his real name. The article named him as Jeremy. He must have changed his name in an attempt to hide his past. My heart was beating out of my chest as I came to the realization that I, along with my co-workers and friends at Walmart, had been targeted by an actual predator. The next day, I told my manager that I was scared of Andrew and mentioned the article that I had found. Several weeks later, I learned that Andrew was fired. The reason? A 17-year-old employee reported that he was making inappropriate comments to her. He was also found drinking on the job. Doing the math, his 12-year-old victim is 18 now. All I can hope is that she finds peace. I was 18 years old, going through a serious rough patch at home, sleeping a lot during the day, partying at night, drinking, but not taking anything else as I had just stopped smoking weed due to some undesirable effects that made me question my sanity. I generally was not really getting anywhere in life. My parents were arguing a lot at home, and I just didn't want to be anywhere near them. Things were pretty bad. I was semi-floating in private and was definitely sorted out so. I worked in a factory at the time and hated every second of it. During one lunch hour at work, I dozed off. This was a normal occurrence for me, and on this occasion, I woke up recalling a vivid dream at which I had a nosebleed at my station. I didn't think much of it. I went back to work, sat at my station, and within minutes, I had the most severe nosebleed of my life without any warning. It was as if a tap had been turned on in my nose. I hadn't had a nosebleed since I was a young child, and that involved falling off my bike. This freaked me out so much that I went home for the rest of the day, much to the annoyance of my supervisor, who had no idea what I had just experienced. It just looked like a nosebleed to him. He had little idea of the existential nightmare going on in my head. When I got home, the house was empty. I did what I normally did when I felt scared and alone. I slept, falling asleep on the sofa which faced the glass French doors in our front room. This time I dreamt that my friend Chris came around and asked me if I wanted to make a spontaneous trip to the south of England, I live in the north, to see our friend Doug, for the first time since he moved there several months ago. This wasn't something we'd ever discussed, nor was it something we had ever planned. I was woken up by a knock at the glass. I opened my eyes, and there stood Chris. I opened the door, and word for word, exactly like in the dream, he asked me if I wanted to go to Ipswich to see Doug. I just stood there in bewilderment. I agreed to go with him. I was so disturbed by the dream that I felt that I really had no other choice. And in all fairness, I'm glad I went. I stayed there for several weeks and had a real coming-of-age experience in a vibrant city, experiencing some great times that really opened my eyes. I didn't tell my parents where I was going, and when I finally returned home, the arguing had stopped. I enrolled in college, and things got a little brighter for me. I'm 36 now, married with kids, and the combined experience of that day still freaks me out. I've tried to rationalize it and tried to put it down to just being chance, but it felt so bizarre. The events were exactly the same as in my dream. Were they pivotal moments in my life? Or just like monkeys on a typewriter writing out the entire works of Shakespeare? Sleep enough and dream enough, and one day, you'll dream out the day's events. I like to think the choice to leave work and go to Ipswich to see my friend forever set my life on a different course. Who knows? So, about 3 or so years ago, I dated this guy. Let's call him Jay for security reasons. He told me a story about when he was younger. He ended up finding this old Ouija board. And of course, being the curious kid he was, he messed with it. From that exact day, his life would be forever changed. An ancient presence would forever haunt and stalk him. Jay always told me that ever since then, he has felt like something watches him, and that he encounters things pretty often. I didn't know whether to believe him because I had not witnessed anything while being with him. Now, I'm definitely a spiritual person, and I'm very open-minded when it comes to things, especially the supernatural. So that's why to this day, I still think about that one night. It still gives me chills. Me and Jay liked to listen to creepy encounter podcasts pretty often, and in the back of my mind, I couldn't imagine to think what it would be like. Like if something like that were to happen to me, you find yourself in a situation that seems like it was straight out of a horror podcast or horror movie. The kind you used to listen to for thrills, never expecting to live out your own tale. So one night, me and my ex were winding down for bed and watching Mort's Chilling Tales on YouTube. It started with a scream, chilling and distant, like a little girl's cry from the shadows, the kind that makes you pause and ask, did I really hear that? I muted the TV, and a couple of seconds later, there it was again, a haunting sound on a loop, breaking the silence of the night. It was such an odd sound. Yes, it sounded like a little girl screaming, but it was just off, like something wanted to lure me outside to investigate. The scream sounded like it was on repeat, as if on a record player. For some reason, all my cats reacted, all 4 of them, all at once gathering and hissing towards the door, as if they saw what we couldn't. Then came the tapping, a persistent and sinister rhythm on the windows, doors, and every entrance, as if something unseen was insisting on being let in. This was the most sinister experience I have ever had. After all that, I decided to immediately hide under the bed, and Jay crawled under with me, my heart beating so loud that I thought that whatever was out there could hear me. We held hands as I tried not to make a noise, while tears rolled down my face. Finally, a few minutes later, everything went silent, and my ex and I, frozen with fear, chose not to investigate, to remain within the safety of our home. But now, in hindsight, part of me wonders what might have happened if we had dared to look. To hear about such a story is one thing, but to live it is indescribable. The fear is tangible, a thick presence in the air. Every sense is heightened. Every shadow is suspect. It's an experience that blurs the line between the world we see and the one we feel in the pit of our stomach during our most vulnerable moments. It's a story that leads me to wonder what lurks in the corners of our reality. I know some of you won't believe me, but what I heard that night was unforgettable. If you guys know anything about skinwalkers, I truly believe that what we encountered that night was just that. Feel free to share any opinions you guys have. So I have a creepy story that happened to me when I was 12. My grandparents were staying with my family for a while, and during that period, they decided to go for a walk one day. I didn't want to go at first, but after about half an hour, I decided to follow after them. I told my mum and went off. It was late evening, almost nighttime, so it was pretty ominous outside. So anyway, I'm walking into the park because I assumed they went that way. And when I get closer to the playground area, it's a relatively straight path to the playground as you can see it in the distance after you enter the park, and I see a man crouched behind the bigger kids' play structure. He was bald and kind of creepy looking. I couldn't get a great look though, due to the darkness and distance still between us. I didn't think much of him and took a few more steps, but then I noticed him staring at me, like dead on. I got pretty nervous and just stopped, and I think he moved a little, and I turned around and ran away fast. I looked back while running, and I'm pretty sure he was following me because he was gone from the playground. I kept on running as fast as I could to my house. Luckily, it was close, and got inside quickly and nervously told my mum. I swear I could hear footsteps running on the pavement in the distance behind me as I ran back. But I didn't look back, too nervous to do so. I never saw him again, but it still worries me occasionally to this day. I think I would have been kidnapped, possibly, or something else bad, if I didn't think thoroughly.